The first body was found in complete silence, except for the steady ticking of a small, old-fashioned clock beside the bed. The hands were frozen, unmoving, at exactly 3:33 a.m. The same time would appear again, and again, and again, until the entire town realized the killer wasn't leaving a calling card. They were leaving a countdown. The rain had been falling for hours, a steady whisper against the windows of the small house at the edge of Hollow Pines. Inside, the warm glow of a bedside lamp painted soft light across the room, casting long shadows over the shelves stacked with books and framed photographs. Emily Hart, a 29-year-old schoolteacher, was curled up beneath her quilt, exhausted from another long day of grading essays and calming restless children. She had no idea that in less than an hour, her name would become the first in a string of murders that would terrify the town. The clock on her nightstand ticked steadily, its brass casing slightly tarnished from age. Emily didn't remember buying it. She assumed it had been a gift from her mother or perhaps something left behind by a previous tenant. Its face was simple, white, with thin black hands and a faintly audible tick that became background noise in the quiet house. Sometime around midnight, she stirred. A sound, faint, almost imagined, crept into her half-dreaming mind. It wasn't the rain. It wasn't the hum of the refrigerator down the hall. This sound was deliberate, soft, measured. She told herself it was nothing, just the old house settling. Hollow Pines was full of creaking wood and groaning pipes. Still, a shiver slid down her spine. Outside, the street was deserted. No headlights cut through the mist. No footsteps echoed in the puddles. If anyone had been watching her house, they were invisible in the veil of the storm. By 2:15 a.m., Emily had drifted back into a deep sleep. She didn't stir when the faint click of the front door lock echoed through the hall. The intruder moved without sound, gloved hands brushing the walls as they navigated the familiar path to her bedroom. This wasn't random. This was practiced. The bedroom door eased open, the hinges whispering just enough to stir Emily from her dreams. Her eyes fluttered open. A shadow stood at the end of her bed, still and silent. She didn't scream. She barely had time to inhale. The next morning, Detective Mark Rains was standing in the very same room, his eyes fixed not on the body, though Emily lay still beneath the covers, but on the clock beside her bed. He wasn't new to death scenes. He'd seen worse. But something about that clock caught his attention immediately. The second hand was frozen mid-tick. The time read exactly 3:33 a.m. Power outage, his partner suggested, leaning in for a closer look. But the lamp still glowed when plugged in. The house had power, and the clock wasn't electric. It was mechanical. There was no reason it should have stopped unless someone had forced it. "Bag it," Rains said quietly. "Print the casing, see if we get anything." There were no fingerprints, no fibers, no signs of forced entry anywhere in the house. Emily's phone sat untouched on the kitchen counter, its screen still showing the alarm she had set for 6:45 a.m. Her handbag hung on the chair, her keys inside. It looked, to anyone unfamiliar, like she had simply gone to bed and never woken up. But Rains had been doing this too long to believe in that kind of simplicity. The positioning of her body, the faint bruising around her neck. This wasn't a heart attack in her sleep. This was deliberate. The medical examiner later confirmed what Rains already suspected: ligature strangulation, precise and controlled. Whoever had done this had been close enough to watch her die. 2 days later, Hollow Pines tried to move on. Emily's funeral was small, attended mostly by her students and colleagues. The brass clock was logged away in the evidence room. And for a brief, uneasy moment, the town convinced itself that this was an isolated tragedy. Then came the second murder. The victim was a retired postal worker named Gerald Price, found in his recliner, television still on. The scene was almost identical. No signs of forced entry, no theft, nothing disturbed. Only the same inexplicable detail. A small, old-fashioned clock sitting on the coffee table, its hands frozen at 3:33 a.m. That was when Rains felt the cold settle in his gut. 2 different people, 2 different homes. No apparent connection. But that clock, that exact time, was no accident. It was a signature, a message. Rains stared at the evidence board that night, the photographs of the victims side by side. He circled the clocks in red marker. They weren't identical in design. Emily's was brass, Gerald's was wooden. But both were clearly antique. Both stopped at the same second. He flipped through the forensics reports again. Both clocks were in perfect working condition before they froze. No mechanical failure. No tampering detected in a way that made sense. It was as if they had simply died at that moment. And then there was the deeper question, the one Rains couldn't yet put on paper. Why 3:33 a.m.? Some cops laughed off the idea of symbolism in murder. Others knew better. That hour had a reputation in old folklore, the devil's hour, a time when, according to superstition, the veil between the living and the dead was at its thinnest. Rains didn't believe in ghosts, but he knew killers sometimes believed in their own myths. If this was ritualistic, the killer was methodical, calculated. As the rain began to fall again outside his office window, Rains knew one thing with absolute certainty. Emily Hart had not been the first choice. She had been the first message. The next victim was already chosen. And somewhere, in some quiet room, a clock was already ticking toward 3:33 a.m. The third murder came only 5 nights after Gerald Price was found. This time, it was a young single mother named Claire Dalton. Her neighbors described her as cautious, even paranoid, the type to double-lock every door and check the windows before bed. Yet when detectives arrived, they found her apartment untouched, the locks unbroken, her child asleep in the next room, unharmed. Claire lay lifeless on the living room floor, her eyes half open, her body angled as if she'd been trying to stand when it happened. On the coffee table beside her was the clock, dark mahogany, with delicate golden hands, stopped at exactly 3:33 a.m. It wasn't a coincidence anymore. It was a pattern, and patterns meant planning. Detective Rains stood in Claire's apartment longer than he needed to, his eyes scanning for details that others might miss. A faint drag mark on the carpet near the table, a half-drunk glass of water on the counter, a pair of shoes placed neatly by the door, except they weren't hers, at least not according to her sister. This killer wasn't just leaving clocks. They were in the house long enough to move things, to alter the space in subtle ways. It wasn't just murder. It was intrusion. By the fourth victim, the media had caught on. The Hollow Pines Chronicle ran the headline, "Clock Killer Strikes Again. Police Baffled by 3:33 a.m. Clue." Local news stations replayed grainy footage of covered bodies being wheeled from homes, speculation running wild. Was it a serial killer with a fixation on time? A cult ritual? Someone playing out a twisted superstition? The victims still had no obvious link. Different ages, different neighborhoods, different lifestyles. Gerald was retired. Emily was a teacher. Claire worked as a receptionist. The fourth, a mechanic named Vincent Alvarez, lived alone on the far side of town. The only thread tying them together was the clock, and each one was different in design, but eerily similar in age and craftsmanship. Rains requested a full trace on the clocks. Antique dealers, estate sales, pawn shops, anywhere an object like that could have come from. But the results came back empty. No recent sales matched. No stolen property reports. It was as if each clock had appeared from nowhere. Then came the detail that made Rain's skin crawl. Every clock was traced back, eventually, to the victim's own home. But family and friends swore they had never seen them before the week of the murder. It was as if the killer had placed them their days in advance, hidden in plain sight, letting the victim live alongside their own countdown without realizing it. The fifth body belonged to a college student named Mariah Lewis. Her roommate had been out all night, returning home at dawn to find police tape across their door. The scene was the same. No forced entry, no theft, no struggle loud enough to wake the neighbors. And there, on her desk, the clock ticked its last second at 3:33 a.m. before freezing forever. The coroner's report added another chilling note. All the victims had died within minutes of the exact time shown on the clock. Not hours earlier, not hours later. The time wasn't symbolic. It was the moment of death. That meant the killer was there, standing within arm's reach, as the second hand stopped. Rains began to suspect that whoever was doing this wasn't just killing. They were marking the moment, fixing it, trapping it inside a mechanical reminder. The pressure was building. The mayor wanted answers. The press wanted interviews. Rains wanted a break in the case, but the killer moved like smoke, leaving nothing but their eerie signature behind. Then a fragment of information surfaced. One of the victims, Gerald Price, had received a small package days before his death. No return address. Inside, the very clock found at his crime scene. The delivery company had no usable records, no security footage, just an entry in the log, delivered, left at door. Raines ordered the team to re-interview all the families, asking the same question: had any of them received a package before the murders? The answers trickled in, hesitant but confirming his suspicion: yes. Each victim had received something, and inside was a clock. The realization shifted the case from reactive to proactive. If they could identify the next delivery, they might stop the next murder. But the killer wasn't sloppy. Packages were paid for in cash, shipped through small mail kiosks miles apart, never the same twice. Raines didn't sleep much in those weeks. Every morning, he half expected a call saying another body had been found. Every night, he replayed the facts in his mind. It was too precise, too careful. The killer had to know the victims somehow, had to have been inside their homes to leave the clocks in places they would notice, but not suspect. Folklore about 3:33 a.m. gnawed at him. Stories claimed it was the inversion of 3 a.m., the traditional holy hour in some beliefs, making it a mocking, unholy time. Superstition said it was when the line between the living and the dead blurred. Raines didn't care for superstition, but he understood one thing clearly: this wasn't random. To the killer, the time meant something deeply personal. And until he knew what, they were always one step ahead. The sixth murder didn't just confirm that, it escalated it. A widower named Thomas Crane was found sitting upright in bed, as if waiting for someone. On the nightstand, the clock read 3:33 a.m. But this time, there was something new, a note tucked beneath it. For words, printed neatly on a strip of paper: "You're running out of time." For the first time, Raines felt certain the message wasn't just for the victims. It was for him. The note changed everything. Until then, the murders had felt like puzzles, cold, detached, almost clinical in their precision. But those 4 words were a direct challenge. A taunt. Raines had the note tested for prints, DNA, anything. Nothing. The paper was standard printer stock, the ink from a common cartridge. No distinctive tears or folds. Just another piece of the killer's calculated control. The clock from Thomas Crane's nightstand was bagged and logged with the others, but Raines couldn't shake the feeling that this one was different. He sat in the evidence room for hours, staring at the row of timepieces lined up under plastic. Brass, wood, iron, each with its own unique design, each frozen at the same second. But now, looking closely, he noticed something. A faint engraving on the back of the Crane clock, almost invisible under the tarnish. 3 numbers, 2005. It meant nothing at first, but the thought gnawed at him. He ordered the engravings on the others checked. Every clock had a different year etched into its back. 1998, 2010, 2016. They weren't manufacturing dates. They weren't random. They were years, and Raines suspected they marked something important to the killer. Digging deeper, he matched the years to events in Hollow Pines. One by one, they lined up. Fires, car accidents, disappearances. Not all were famous cases, but each had left at least one person dead. And in every case, one of the current victims had been connected: a witness, a neighbor, a distant relative. It wasn't random. The killer was hunting people tied to tragedies from the past. The next break came when a woman named Julia Price, Gerald Price's niece, called the station in a panic. She'd received a small cardboard package on her porch that morning. No return address. Inside was a clock, silver with ornate carvings. The second Raines heard, he was moving. Julia was alive, which meant they had a chance. They placed her in protective custody and staged her house with hidden cameras, turning it into a trap. Officers were stationed nearby, unmarked cars blending into the street. The plan was simple: wait for the killer to come at 3:33 a.m. The night dragged. Midnight came and went. Julia, pale but composed, stayed in the safe house, watched over by 2 officers. At 2:45, the street outside her home remained empty. At 3 o'clock, a light wind rustled the trees. Then, at 3:20, movement. A dark figure appeared at the side of the house, bypassing the front door entirely. They moved low, quick, like someone who knew exactly where the blind spots were. Raines whispered into his radio, directing the team to hold position until the suspect was inside. The figure slipped in through the back door. No hesitation, no fumbling, just smooth, practiced motion. They moved to the living room, straight to the coffee table where the clock sat. Raines could see them now on the monitor, dressed head to toe in black, face covered, gloved hands reaching out to adjust the clock's hands. His pulse hammered. He gave the order. The room exploded with movement. Officers surged in from every entry point, shouting commands. The figure froze, then bolted toward the hallway, moving faster than Rains thought possible. Furniture toppled, footsteps pounded, a door slammed. By the time they reached the back of the house, the killer was gone. The window stood open, the night swallowing the sound of pursuit. It had been seconds, just seconds. Rains cursed under his breath, scanning for any clue left behind. The clock sat on the table, its hands now positioned at 3:33 a.m. They hadn't stopped it this time, they'd set it. The message was clear. You were close, but not close enough. And then came the call that made Rain's stomach drop. While the entire team had been focused on Julia's house, another murder had occurred across town. A man named Darren Walsh, 43, found in his bedroom, clock stopped at 3:33. The killer had used Julia as bait, not the other way around. For days, Rains barely left the station. He mapped every victim, every year on the clocks, every past tragedy they tied back to. And slowly, the picture formed. In 2005, there had been a fire at a boarding house on the edge of town. 6 dead. The official cause, faulty wiring. But some survivors claimed it was arson, though no one was ever charged. The survivors and witnesses had scattered over the years. Every single one of them, or their close relatives, had now been targeted by the killer. The motive was revenge. Cold, patient revenge. Whoever was behind this had been waiting nearly 2 decades to strike. The final piece fell into place when Rains found a name that had slipped past initial records. Daniel Cresswell. 16 years old in 2005, badly injured in the fire, lost his parents that night. He'd been placed in foster care, moved away, and never returned, at least not officially. But surveillance footage from the night of Julia's attempted trap showed something in the killer's movement, a slight limp in the left leg. The same injury Daniel Cresswell had sustained in the fire. Rains knew now who he was hunting. The question was whether he could stop him before the final clock struck. 2 nights later, Rains found himself standing in front of a small, decaying house on the outskirts of town. Inside, the air smelled of dust and oil. Against one wall was a workbench covered in tools, clock parts scattered in neat piles. And in the center, a row of clocks, all set to 3:33. Only one had its hands still moving. It was almost 3 in the morning.